Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Bloom, Group Publisher of Roofing Supply Pro, and welcome to our podcast show. It is such an honor to have with me John DeRosa with SRS Distribution. John, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm the one that's honored, but thank you.
Well, it's always fun to have these conversations with you, John, because you bring some really fun sales insight to everybody listening. And we all know when it comes to distribution and it comes to sales, there's a certain element of being disruptive, which is what we were talking about before we got on. And we really had a fun conversation. I'm really looking forward for you to share some of your insight with all the distributors listening. So what does everybody need to know? How do you be disruptive?
Yeah, and I say be disruptive, and we don't like disruption, right? I mean, we like things that are just kind of status quo stuff. But as a sales rep for a distributor, you're ultimately trying to get your prospective customer to buy from you. And I think that you need to have this mindset that you need that really speaks to how am I going to disrupt like that status quo to compel the customer to want to do some business with me. And I think what we're trying to really break free from is this whole sort of like eventually mindset. And I think a lot of salespeople have this mindset where, look, if I just keep calling on them and I keep telling them how good we are, that eventually I'm going to get an order. And I would ask you guys if that's the mindset, to really question, what is the goal? I mean, is the goal to get an order? Because that could be pretty easy to do. I would suggest that your goal really needs to be to earn a customer. And to do that, I would argue that you really need to kind of develop an intimate relationship with them and disrupt their way of thinking to the point where they can see the world as a better place with you in it. And that's not easy, but it's certainly something to focus on.
Yeah. And so, John, we were talking through really the top 4 things that everybody should focus on. And let's run through those. The first one you talked about was bringing value.
Yeah, I think, we all hear sell value, right? And I may have, I always tell a story that when I was a sales rep for a window company, I remember telling my manager I lost the sale because we were $3,000 high. And he was like, you got to sell the value, John. And I remember thinking, dude, if I knew how to sell the value, I wouldn't be telling you I lost the job over $3,000. And it was kind of an interesting moment because I realized that, as I became a sales manager later on, that a lot of my sales reps didn't really understand what that meant. And I think that what I tried to do was define what value is, and I'd always define total value as the need plus the perceived value of whatever it is that you're trying to sell them. Now, the good news for distributor salespeople is that when we're selling building materials, the customer already has a need. Right? I've got a contractor out there. He's doing 2,000 squares a year with Owens Corning. He has a need for Owens Corning products. So I don't need to sell the need. I just really need to sell the contractor on the perceived value of doing business with us. And I would suggest that makes us a little bit lazy as salespeople because we take comfort in the fact, like with that eventually mindset. Hey, as long as I just stay in front of this guy and I keep bringing value and I keep showing up with donuts, and I'm being facetious when I say that, but eventually I'm going to get an order. Well, the reality is none of us have the luxury of eventually. And I would argue that the contractor doesn't also have the luxury of eventually enjoying all the benefits that your company is going to bring to them, which is why we need to be disruptive.
Yeah, which was a great podcast that you really dove into the details on. But number 2, we talked about were relationships and really pulling that contractor out of their comfort zone. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think that a lot of reps, and I mean, I'm not trying to be, jump on a soapbox here, but I think some of us are kind of all talk, no action when it comes to relationships. And every rep in our industry is going to, beat their chest and say, this is a relationship business and it's all about relationships. But what I want to know is like, well, what are you really doing to bring real value to the relationship? A relationship isn't about me bringing them donuts and taking them golfing and taking them out to dinner every once in a while. A real relationship is about, genuinely caring about somebody and putting their interests before your own, right? If you had a friend or a family member that was doing something that was disruptive, or they were doing something that was hurting them or causing their family harm, I would bet that the vast majority of us would pull those people aside and we would kind of get in their face and say, you're screwing up, man. You got to make this happen. Well, I would argue that as a distributor, you've got tools and you've got programs and you've got all of these things, whether it be your digital tools or whatever it is that you're trying to bring to the customer. And every day that customer is not utilizing those tools, they're missing out on the opportunities and the many ways that they can benefit from those tools. So stop being all talk and no action about the relationship. Figure out how you can kind of disrupt their mindset to make them want to take advantage of those tools, because it's in their best interest and your best interest for them to do
Mhm.
that.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, I think all the distributors out there have those tools that people don't do a good enough job of taking advantage of them. So
Yeah.
it's great to talk about that. Um, the other three, number three, we talked about identifying value, but you mentioned playing chess, not checkers. And what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so here's what happens, right? I mentioned the total value is equal to the need plus the perceived value. Because the need already exists, we get involved in a checker game. And the checker game is me just showing up and throwing up and telling them all the reasons why it's going to be better if you buy from me. Hey, I know you're buying Owens Corning from the other guy, but if you buy it from me, we're going to treat you better. We're going to, you're going to have a better relationship. It's going to be a better experience. We're laser focused on you and your success. It's just a lot of talk. And I would suggest that if you want the customer to really engage and buy into what it is that you're saying, rather than talking about all the things that you do, why don't you start asking questions about what it is that's important? Try to identify their problems, their difficulties, and their dissatisfactions. And then on the basis of discovering those problems and those difficulties, figure out how you can help the contractor solve those problems, but do it in a way that's sort of biased to your strengths. This is particularly important when it comes to like even selling like our digital tools, for example. What we've got to realize is from a digital tool perspective, most contractors are going to look at those tools and say, wow, there's a lot of neat stuff in there, but I don't need it. And a lot of our salespeople are going to hear, hey, it's a really great tool, but that's what I've got you for. And I would argue that that reaction is based on us trying to sell the contractor on the value of the tool, the perceived value of the tool, and we're ignoring the need for us to establish a need with the contractor. And look, it's like an old story that I tell about me traveling with my sales rep manager and us going in and making a passionate case for somebody to buy from us. And the customer agreed. He says, hey, I think you guys are a good company. I definitely think you could add some value, but I'm going to stay where I'm at. So I didn't get the sale. And I got in the car and I said to my manager, and I go, well, and I was actually trying to defend myself. I go, I guess it just goes to show that you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And my manager, God bless him, because he had the smarts to say to me, John, your job as a salesperson is not to make them drink. Your job is to make them thirsty. So think about that in the perspective of the tools that you're trying to sell. You're out there and you're sort of force feeding this solution by talking about, look at how easy it is to use. Look at all the bells and whistles. Look at all the neat things that you can do with this tool. You're selling the perceived value. You're trying to force them to drink. What I want you to do is to start asking questions. Ask really, questions that speak to the drivers of the business, that speak to the things that are critically important to the customer. Understand what their problems and their difficulties are. And then use your knowledge of the customer to kind of build a bridge back to those solutions so that you can help them identify, have that aha moment that makes them say, hey, I might want to take advantage of that tool. Once they say they want it, well, then I can dazzle them with all the ease of use and all the sexy features and bells and whistles. But me getting in to do that, it's the same thing. Like we see this in everything, right? You try to convince a sales rep to sell this program and he says, well, I don't need to do that. I'm already, achieving my numbers without it. You try to convince a sales rep to use a CRM and they go, I don't need a CRM. I'm already effective without it. It's like, because you're trying to sell them on, well, look at how easy it is. Look at all the great stuff you can do. Stop focusing on the perceived value until you establish that need first.
Main point for sure. And the last thing we talk about, John, was just really how do salespeople hold themselves accountable?
Yeah, and that's probably where we should have started, right?
Probably, right?
and it's kind of funny, and I hate to say this, but it all starts and always ends with accountability. I mean, no matter how we like it, it's just that word that keeps coming up. But look, I need to be accountable to the fact that, number one, am I an expert in everything that we do as a distributor and as a salesperson, everything that we do that brings value to the customer? Am I an expert? If I'm not an expert, then there's probably a pretty good chance that I'm not going to be able to sell that value. But look, now that I'm an expert on my products and my tools, I also need to be an expert on the customer. And what I don't know about the customer, I can ask questions to learn. And where those two circles sort of intersect, that becomes an opportunity for us to bring value, because I understand these are the problems that we can solve for the customer. Now what I want to do is I want to be accountable to going in and asking the questions to see if those problems exist, so that I can then explore the costs of those problems and potentially sell the value of that. I mean, one question that I would ask every sales rep to think about is answer the question, right? And I don't want anybody to ever think that I would encourage you to sell based on an elevator pitch, because that's just, no one really wants to buy into that. But what I do want you to think about is if I was a contractor and I came up to you and said, why should I buy from your company? Or why should I use your digital tool? Like, what would you say? And like, record that message and have the courage to listen to it and be critical of yourself. Because I would argue that in a lot of cases, there's reps out there that probably can't put two sentences together on those things. And yet you're then going to say, it's not my fault the customer doesn't want it. Well, but you can't even talk to me about it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's really where that accountability comes in, is it's like, I've got to own it. And I'll say everything too, Joe. It's like, be accountable to the fact that be accountable to the customer, right? I think I've said in a previous podcast that I think we're responsible for things, but we're accountable to people, right? We're accountable to people. And when there's accountability involved, there's a relationship involved. So now we're talking about that customer relationship. I'm accountable to my customer. I'm accountable to doing the things that are going to put them in the best position to win, and also, be responsible for my organization as well. Don't be afraid to have those difficult conversations with your customer. Don't be afraid to challenge them to step outside of that comfort zone. I can tell you, without getting into too much detail, that we've done surveys that have very clearly showed a correlation between customer loyalty and price sensitivity and the value that they get from their sales reps. We have had customers that have said, I give you less than half or none of my business, and your price is higher. And then they've said, I don't get any value out of the salespeople. And conversely, we could see that there's contractors out there that say, I give you more than half or all of my business, and I think your price is higher, but I get tremendous value from my salespeople. So the good news is we're doing some things right with some customers. And if we could just figure out how to duplicate those things with some of the other customers, it's going to allow everybody, including the customer, to enjoy a higher level of success. So challenge yourself to, again, be disruptive. And if you want more information on that, the book that we talked about that I would recommend is called The Challenger Sale. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. And I think that when you come to terms with the type of salesperson you are and what the type of person that you need to be, that really is where that accountability stuff comes in. Because now I have to recognize these are the things that I need to do a better job of to help my customer enjoy the benefits of doing business with us.
Oh, I love it. Well, maybe next time we talk, John, we can dive into the Challenger Sale and talk some more about those details. Good sales books are always fun to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
Well, John, thank you so much for all your insight. If anybody has any questions and they want to ask you something directly, how do they get a hold of you?
You can just email me at jderosa@srsdistribution.com.
Sounds great. And if anybody has any questions for us, it is roofingsupplypro.com. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for all our free content, especially follow us on all our social media channels so you can stay up to date on all the great content we're putting out, especially the great sales insight we have today from John. But most importantly, stay safe and healthy, and we can't wait to talk to you soon. Thanks again, John.
Thank you. Appreciate it.